Black billionaire boy's first-class seat snatched by a rude white dude. Just seconds later, the whole plane gets grounded. "Excuse me, sir, you're in my seat," Malik Adebayo said, cool and polite, holding up his fancy boarding pass. The white guy just grunted, not even looking up from his tablet. "Nah, kid," he mumbled, waving him off. "You got the wrong idea. This is mine." A few folks nearby looked up, sensing trouble. What happened next would stop a whole flight before it even left the ground, show some nasty prejudice for everyone to see, and prove that sometimes the person you think is small time actually runs the whole show. This 12-year-old dude was about to drop a major lesson on an entire airplane about respect, dignity, and how dumb it is to judge a book by its cover. Welcome to Black Fables. Every story we share ain't just drama. It's about showing our strength, our hustle, and getting what's fair. If you're down to celebrate Black greatness and stand up against unfairness, hit that like and subscribe button right now. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. 12-year-old Malik Adebayo strode down the jet bridge towards Flight 727 with the kind of chill confidence that said, "I belong here." At 4 feet tall, with his short, neat afro and a posture that screamed well-raised, he moved with a smooth grace he'd picked up from years of hanging out at big-time charity events, business powwows, and global conferences with his mom. His simple but expensive threads, a crisp white linen shirt and tailored shorts, hinted at serious cash, even if most folks wouldn't recognize the designer tags or the slick custom watch that had been a gift from a real-deal tech legend. This was like his 20th first-class flight this year alone, bouncing between his boarding school in Switzerland, his mom's office in New York, and their family homes in Lagos and Dubai. For Malik, flying first class wasn't some big deal. It was just, Tuesday. His mom, Dr. Amina Adebayo, had built a global healthcare empire worth over $15 billion, making her one of the richest Black women in the world. But to most people, Malik was just a little Black boy. And sadly, that's exactly how the dude in seat 3B saw him. Malik got to row 3 and instantly knew there was a problem. A middle-aged white businessman had sprawled himself across Malik's window seat like he owned the whole dang plane. His fancy suit was a bit rumpled from travel, his light brown hair messy, and his whole vibe just screamed, "I always get my way." He was tapping away on his laptop, completely oblivious that he was chilling in someone else's spot. "Excuse me," Malik said politely, his voice carrying the smooth accent he'd learned from his international schooling. "I think you're in my seat." He held out his boarding pass, clearly showing Seat 3B, first class, with his name, Mr. M. Adebayo, right there. The ticket was crisp, expensive-looking, and legit. Any normal person would have checked it, said "my bad," and moved, but this guy wasn't normal. He looked up from his laptop with an annoyed squint, like Malik was a bug buzzing in his ear. His eyes scanned Malik, young, Black, kid, and his brain probably just thought, "No way this guy belongs in first class." Without even peeking at the boarding pass, he waved Malik away. "Nah, little man," he grumbled, with that condescending tone you use on a kid who wandered off. "You must be lost. This is my seat. Economy's back there." He pointed towards the back of the plane with a casual arrogance that said he'd never been told no in his life. The words just hung there, heavy and gross. A few passengers nearby looked up from their magazines and phones, sensing the awkward vibe. A sharp-looking woman across the aisle frowned deep. A guy a row back already had his phone out, probably smelling drama. Malik felt that familiar sting when folks judge you before they even know you. But he'd learned a long time ago from his mom not to let his emotions take over. Growing up with a super successful entrepreneur for a mother meant he'd dealt with this kind of nonsense before. People saw what they expected, not who he really was. You want to know how Malik handles this guy's rudeness? Stick around, because this is just the beginning of a lesson no one on that plane will ever forget. "Sir," Malik said, keeping his voice super calm, even though the dude was being a jerk. "I'm not lost. This is seat 3B, and this is my boarding pass for seat 3B. You're in my spot." He held the boarding pass closer, but the guy didn't even glance at it. Instead, he chuckled. Seriously, he chuckles. Like the idea of a Black kid having a legit first-class ticket was the funniest thing he'd heard all day. "Listen, champ," he said with that fake patient tone. "I don't know how you got mixed up, but kids don't just wander into first class. Your parents are probably looking for you back in the economy. Why don't you run along and find them before you get into trouble?" The condescension was dripping. He hadn't just refused to look at Malik's ticket. He'd assumed Malik was with parents, assumed he couldn't afford first class, and assumed he was too young and too black to be near him. Every single assumption was dead wrong, but his prejudice had blinded him to any other possibility. Other passengers were now openly staring. The woman across the aisle looked shocked. A young couple in the front row had stopped talking to watch the show. An older gentleman was shaking his head, clearly recognizing the racist undertones. Malik just stood in the aisle, his boarding pass still extended, his cool unbroken. He'd learned from his mom that the loudest voice usually ain't the strongest. Real power comes from being calm and sure of yourself, from knowing your worth, no matter what others think. "Sir," he said one more time, "I'm gonna ask you to please look at my boarding pass and move to your correct seat." His voice now had a slight edge, a quiet warning that his politeness was a choice, not a weakness. The businessman finally looked up from his laptop with genuine annoyance, like this black kid was ruining his whole day by daring to claim a seat he'd decided was his. His face twisted into a mix of frustration and, honestly, racial resentment. "Look, kid," he said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I've been flying first class longer than you've been alive. This is my seat. I paid for this seat, and I'm not moving for some confused little boy who wandered away from mommy and daddy." The racist vibe of his words hit the cabin like a punch. Several passengers gasped. The woman across the aisle muttered, "Oh my God!" The dude with the phone was now recording for real, seeing that this was raw prejudice going down. But what the racist passenger didn't know, what he couldn't have known because of his dumb assumptions, was that he'd just messed with the wrong one. He'd chosen to be a jerk to the son of one of the most powerful people in the world. He'd decided to try and humiliate a kid who had connections and influence that could wreck his whole career with one phone call. Malik Adebayo wasn't just any 12-year-old boy. He was the future of a massive business empire. The son of a woman who owned hospitals, tech companies, and real estate all over the globe. He was someone who'd hung out with presidents and CEOs, someone who spoke 3 languages and had been in Forbes magazine as one of the world's most influential young minds. And he was about to remind this racist businessman that judging folks by how they look is a terrible, terrible mistake. You think the flight attendant's gonna step in and fix this mess? Or will she just make things worse? Stay tuned, because the plot thickens and Malik's about to get a whole new level of disrespect. Just then, a flight attendant showed up, drawn by the ruckus and all the passengers craning their necks. But instead of just checking boarding passes and fixing the obvious seating mix-up, she looked at the well-dressed white businessman, then at the black kid, and her own biases started showing. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. But her tone and body language already suggested she knew who belonged in first class and who didn't. If you're digging this story about standing up to unfairness, and you want to see how this sharp kid handles this messed up situation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Have you ever seen someone get treated badly because of their race or age? What would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. The flight attendant's arrival should have been the moment things got straightened out. A quick check of the tickets would have instantly shown Malik was right and the businessman was wrong. But instead of being neutral and professional, her own unconscious biases started messing with her judgment. She was a woman in her 40s with 15 years in airline customer service. And sadly, those years had taught her to make snap judgments about passengers based on how they looked, their age, and their race. Looking at the businessman in his fancy suit, she saw authority and legitimacy. Looking at Malik, she just saw a kid who probably didn't belong in first class. "Son," the flight attendant said to Malik, with that patronizing patience you save for a difficult child, "can I see your boarding pass?" The request itself wasn't wrong, but the tone and the fact that she only asked Malik for his ticket, completely ignoring the businessman who hadn't shown any proof, screamed where her assumptions lay. Malik handed over his boarding pass without saying a word, watching as the flight attendant examined it with way too much scrutiny, like she expected it to be fake. The boarding pass was real, looked expensive, and clearly showed Malik was assigned to seat 3B. But instead of immediately telling the businessman to move, the flight attendant hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of confronting a well-dressed white man on behalf of a black kid. "This does show seat 3B, the flight attendant admitted, sounding kinda reluctant, but there seems to be some confusion. "Sir," she turned to the businessman with a much softer, more respectful tone. "Could I possibly see your boarding pass as well?" The businessman looked up with that annoyed expression, like his authority was being questioned by folks beneath him. "I don't need to show you anything," he said, waving her off. "I've been sitting in first class for years. This little boy is obviously in the wrong section." His refusal to show his ticket should have been a huge red flag, but the flight attendant seemed more worried about avoiding an argument with the aggressive white passenger than doing her job or protecting the black kid who was clearly facing discrimination. "Well," the flight attendant said weakly, "maybe we could find Mr. Adebayo another seat in first class. I'm sure we can figure something out that makes everyone comfortable." The suggestion was wild. Malik had paid for a specific seat, had a boarding pass proving his right to it, and was being asked to move because some racist stranger decided he didn't belong there. It was exactly the kind of systemic bias his mom had spent her whole career fighting against in boardrooms worldwide. Before Malik could even say anything, the businessman took it to a whole new level, showing everyone just how deep his prejudice ran. You will not believe what he says next and how Malik chooses to respond. Don't go anywhere. Before Malik could even respond, the businessman upped the ante with words that showed just how messed up his prejudice really was. "You should go find your economy seat," he said with a nasty smirk that made his racist intent crystal clear. "Maybe back near the bathrooms where you belong. I'm sure your parents are wondering where their little boy wandered off to." The words hit the cabin like a bomb. Several passengers gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth in shock. The guy recording on his phone zoomed in, knowing he was capturing pure, unfiltered racism that would likely end up in a civil rights lawsuit. The comment about the bathrooms was especially low, playing into old, ugly stereotypes about where black folks belong on public transport. A few passengers actually chuckled under their breath. Whether from nerves or agreement, it was unclear, but their laughter just made the hostile vibe worse for a 12-year-old kid who had done nothing wrong except be black in first class. Malik felt that familiar fire of righteous anger bubbling up inside him, but he'd learned from his mom's example how to turn that anger into something way more powerful than just emotion. Dr. Amina Adebayo had taught him that the best way to deal with discrimination wasn't to blow up. It was to stay ice-cold calm, then hit back with something devastating. "Sir," he said, his voice still perfectly controlled despite the racial slurs, "I paid for this seat with my own money. I belong here more than you do, since you apparently don't even have a boarding pass to prove you belong anywhere on this plane." His words were sharp and precise, delivered with a quiet authority that made a few passengers sit up and pay closer attention. This wasn't just some lost kid. This was someone who spoke with the confidence of someone used to being heard and respected. But the businessman was too deep in his racist bubble to catch the warning. Instead of backing down, he doubled down on his prejudice, saying stuff that would soon be seen by millions around the world. "You don't even look like you could afford a ticket here," he said loudly, his voice echoing through the first-class cabin. "What'd you do? Steal someone's boarding pass? Or maybe Daddy's company is flying you somewhere for charity?" The racist implications were impossible to ignore now. He'd suggested a black kid couldn't legitimately afford first class, that he might be a thief, and that any money his family had must come from charity, not hard work. Each word dug his hole deeper, but his prejudice had totally blinded him. Other passengers were now picking sides. The woman across the aisle looked furious. An older black businessman in row 4 was shaking his head, clearly having seen this before. A young white couple was whispering. The woman looked horrified while the man seemed unsure what to do. The flight attendant, facing a seriously ugly situation, made the absolute worst choice. Instead of enforcing airline rules and removing the aggressive passenger who was making things hostile, she turned to Malik with a warning that showed exactly whose side she was on. "Mr. Adebayo," she said with barely hidden irritation, "I'm gonna need you to lower your voice and find a solution that works for everyone. Or I'll have to ask you to leave the aircraft for causing a disturbance." The nerve. The black kid who's being racially abused is getting threatened, while the racist dude gets a pass? This injustice is about to get a major dose of reality. You won't believe the quiet threat Malik drops next. The threat was mind-blowing in its unfairness. The black boy who had been racially attacked, denied his rightful seat, and publicly humiliated was being threatened with removal. Meanwhile, the white businessman who started the whole mess faced zero consequences. Several passengers immediately saw the flight attendant's bias. The woman across the aisle stood up and said loudly, "Are you serious? He's the one causing the disturbance. He's the one who won't show his boarding pass and keeps making racist comments." But the flight attendant had made her choice. She was siding with the aggressive white businessman against the calm black boy, keeping that same old institutional racism alive and well in the airline industry. Malik looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of the passengers watching this raw moment of prejudice. Some looked supportive, others uncomfortable, and a few seemed to agree with the businessman's messed-up opinion that he didn't belong in first class. But all of them were about to learn something important about the danger of judging folks by their race and age. "Ma'am," Malik said to the flight attendant with deadly calm, "I think you should be very careful how you handle this situation. Very careful indeed." There was something in his tone, a quiet certainty that hinted at consequences far bigger than anything the flight attendant or the racist businessman could ever imagine. But they were too caught up in their own biases to hear the warning. They had no idea they were discriminating against someone with the power to ground their flight, wreck their careers, and expose their prejudice to the whole world. They were about to find out that sometimes the person you totally underestimate turns out to be exactly the wrong person to mess with. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. This kid is about to drop a bombshell. And this racist passenger's whole world is about to come crashing down. What do you think should happen to employees who side with racists instead of protecting passengers from discrimination? Share your thoughts in the comments. The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. What started as a simple seat mix-up had blown up into a public display of racial discrimination, with passengers, crew, and airline staff picking sides based on their own biases and beliefs. The air was buzzing with unspoken conflict, and everyone could feel that something huge was about to happen. The businessman, feeling like the flight attendant had his back and seeing the mixed reactions from other passengers, decided to push his harassment of Malik even further. He'd convinced himself he was just dealing with another entitled kid who would eventually back down when faced with an adult. His prejudice had blinded him to the quiet strength in Malik's voice and the dangerous calm in his demeanor. "You know what your problem is," he said, standing up from the seat that wasn't his and looming over Malik, clearly trying to intimidate him. "Your problem is that you people think you can just take whatever you want. You think you deserve things you haven't earned. Well, this is the real world, little boy. And in the real world, there are consequences for not knowing your place. You people, your place." The racist language was now so obvious, even folks trying to ignore it couldn't. This guy just pushed Malik too far. Get ready, because Malik's about to make a call that changes everything. The racist language was now so explicit that even passengers who had been trying to mind their own business couldn't ignore it. You people, your place. These were the words of someone whose prejudice had totally taken over. Several passengers pulled out their phones, realizing this needed to be recorded. A middle-aged black woman in row 4 stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Excuse me, but what did you just say? Did you really just tell a child to know his place because of his race?" The businessman turned his attention to her with the same rude arrogance. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. I'm simply trying to maintain order in first class by ensuring that passengers are seated appropriately according to their circumstances." The word circumstances dripped with racial undertones, making his meaning crystal clear. He was suggesting that black passengers didn't belong in first class, no matter their tickets, their money, or their right to be there. It was segregationist thinking dressed up as airline policy. But Malik Adebayo had heard enough. He had been raised by a mom who had faced this exact kind of discrimination on her way to building a massive business empire. And he had been taught never to back down when injustice stared him in the face. More importantly, he had been given tools to fight back that this racist businessman couldn't even imagine. "Sir," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with laser precision, "I think you should sit down and be quiet now." There was something in his tone that made several passengers turn to look at him more carefully. This wasn't the voice of a confused kid or a helpless victim. This was the voice of someone who had been underestimated and was about to show everyone how big a mistake that was. The businessman laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Oh, really? And what are you going to do about it, little boy? Call your mommy? Tell the principal? This is the adult world, and adults handle things differently than children." "You're absolutely right," Malik replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Adults do handle things differently, and you're about to learn exactly how differently." He reached into his designer backpack, a backpack that cost more than most people's rent, though the businessman was too blinded by prejudice to recognize real luxury, and pulled out his phone. It wasn't just any phone. It was the latest model with custom mods that only a handful of people in the world had. The kind of device that had direct access to corporate boardrooms and government offices globally. "I think it's time I called my mother," he said calmly. The businessman laughed even harder. "Oh, please do. I'm sure Mommy will come running to rescue her precious little prince. Maybe she can explain to you how airline seating actually works." Several passengers exchanged glances, sensing that the businessman had just made a crucial error. There was something about Malik's confidence, something about the way he carried himself, that suggested his mom might not be just any concerned parent. But the businessman was too caught up in his own arrogance to see the warning signs. Malik speed-dialed a number that connected him directly to one of the most powerful offices in the global economy. As the phone rang, he looked around the cabin with the calm certainty of someone who was about to flip the script on everyone who had underestimated him. "Hello, Mommy," he said when the call connected, his voice carrying clearly through the now quiet cabin. "I'm sorry to bother you during your board meeting, but I have a situation that requires your immediate attention." The businessman was still smirking, completely unaware that he was about to face consequences beyond his worst nightmares. The flight attendant looked nervous for the first time, starting to sense that maybe she had misjudged the situation. Other passengers leaned forward, trying to hear both sides of the conversation. "I'm on flight 727 to Lagos," Malik continued. "And there's a passenger in my assigned seat who refuses to move. He's made several racist comments, called me names, and suggested that black passengers don't belong in first class. The flight attendant is supporting his position and has threatened to remove me from the aircraft for demanding my rightful seat." He paused, listening to his mother's response, then looked directly at the businessman with an expression that could freeze water. "His name?" he said into the phone. "Let me ask him." He turned to the businessman with mock politeness. "Sir, could you please tell me your name? My mother would like to know exactly who she's dealing with." That smirk on the businessman's face? It's about to vanish. The name he's about to hear from Malik's phone will make his blood run cold. Get ready for the ultimate power move. The businessman's smirk started to falter a little, but his arrogance was still clinging on. "Tell your mommy that my name is Richard Sterling, and I've been flying first class since before you were born. Maybe she can teach her son some manners while she's at it." Malik repeated the name into the phone, then listened as his mother's voice became audible to passengers sitting nearby. What they heard made several of them gasp in recognition and fear. "Richard Sterling," the voice from the phone said with icy authority. "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. You have just made the biggest mistake of your life." The businessman's face began to change as he recognized something dangerous in the voice coming from the kid's phone. This wasn't just an angry parent. This was something else entirely. "My son is Malik Adebayo," the voice continued, "and I am Dr. Amina Adebayo, CEO of Adebayo Global Health. You may recognize my companies: Adebayo Pharmaceuticals, Adebayo Medical Tech, Adebayo Telehealth, and about 50 other businesses that employ over 300,000 people worldwide." The name hit the cabin like a thunderbolt. Dr. Amina Adebayo was one of the most famous entrepreneurs in the world, a billionaire whose business empire spanned multiple industries and continents. Her face had been on the cover of Forbes and Time as one of the most influential people of the year. Her son wasn't just any kid. He was the heir to one of the largest privately held companies in the world. Richard Sterling's face went from confident smirk to horrified realization in the span of 3 seconds. The color drained from his features as he understood exactly who he had been discriminating against. He had chosen to be racist towards the son of one of the most powerful black women in the world, and he had done it in front of dozens of witnesses with cameras. Several passengers were now openly staring at Malik with recognition and awe. The businessman who had been recording was zooming in on Sterling's face, capturing the moment when arrogance turned to terror. The flight attendant looked like she was about to faint as she realized she had threatened to remove the son of a woman who probably owned more airline stock than anyone else on the planet. But Dr. Amina Adebayo wasn't finished speaking. "Mr. Sterling," her voice continued, now carrying the full weight of billionaire authority, "you insulted my son, discriminated against him based on his race, and created a hostile environment that violated both federal civil rights laws and basic human decency. What happens next is entirely up to you." The businessman tried to speak, his voice coming out as a weak croak. "Dr. Adebayo, I didn't know. I mean, I was just—" "You were just what?" Dr. Adebayo's voice cut through his stammering like a knife. "You were just being racist. You were just assuming that a black boy couldn't possibly belong in first class. You were just revealing exactly the kind of person you really are." Sterling looked around the cabin desperately, as if hoping someone might defend him or offer him an escape route. But every face he saw reflected disgust, anger, or satisfaction at seeing justice about to be served. The passengers who had witnessed his discrimination now understood they had watched someone pick exactly the wrong target for their prejudice. The flight attendant tried to salvage the situation with damage control. "Dr. Adebayo, I apologize for any misunderstanding. I'm sure we can resolve this situation quickly." "There is no misunderstanding." Dr. Adebayo's voice interrupted her with arctic coldness. "You sided with a racist passenger against my son. You threatened to remove him from an aircraft while allowing him to continue his discrimination. You failed in your most basic duty to protect passengers from harassment." Malik stood calmly in the aisle, watching as the two adults who had humiliated him just minutes earlier began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. His mother had taught him that true power wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, and making sure that discrimination had consequences that would stop it from happening to others. Malik's mom is about to lay down the law, and everyone on that plane is going to feel it. What happens when a billionaire CEO decides to show real power? You're about to find out, and it's going to be epic. "Now," Dr. Amina Adebayo continued, her voice filling the cabin with absolute authority, "here's what's going to happen next. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will absolutely shock you. This billionaire CEO is about to demonstrate exactly what real power looks like when someone discriminates against her son. Do you think people who make racist assumptions get what they deserve when they face consequences? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below." The silence in the first-class cabin was deafening, as Dr. Amina Adebayo's voice continued to blast from Malik's phone with the authority of someone who controlled billions of dollars and could change lives with a single decision. Every passenger was glued, understanding they were watching a moment when prejudice met consequences in the most dramatic way possible. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Adebayo said, her voice carrying the icy precision of a woman who had built an empire by making quick decisions and executing them ruthlessly, "you need to understand exactly what you've done. You didn't just insult a boy, you insulted my son. You didn't just make racist comments, you made them about a member of my family. And you did it all in front of witnesses who are recording every word." Richard Sterling's transformation from arrogant businessman to terrified defendant was complete. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the AC, and his hands were visibly shaking as he realized his casual racism had just destroyed his life in ways he couldn't even begin to calculate. "Dr. Adebayo, please," Sterling stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I sincerely apologize. I had no idea if you had known what?" Dr. Adebayo's voice cut through his pathetic attempt at damage control like a blade. "If you had known he was my son, would you have treated him with respect? But since you thought he was just another black boy, racism was acceptable?" The question exposed the core of Sterling's prejudice and the fundamental problem with his fake apology. He wasn't sorry for being racist. He was sorry for being racist towards someone with the power to destroy him. His moral failure was complete and public, documented by multiple cameras for the world to see. "Dr. Adebayo," the flight attendant jumped in desperately, "I want to assure you that our airline doesn't tolerate discrimination of any kind. This was simply a misunderstanding about seating arrangements." Dr. Adebayo's laugh was cold and humorless. "A misunderstanding? My son showed you his boarding pass, proving his right to seat 3B. Mr. Sterling refused to show his boarding pass at all. My son remained calm and polite while he made racist comments. And you threatened to remove him from the aircraft while taking his side. Exactly what part of that was a misunderstanding? The flight attendant had no answer, because there was no answer. Her bias had been exposed as clearly as Sterling's racism, and now she was facing the consequences of siding with prejudice instead of protecting a passenger from discrimination. But Dr. Amina Adebayo was just getting started. Her voice took on a tone that suggested she was moving from just stating facts to taking serious action. "I'm going to put you on speakerphone now," she announced, "because I want everyone in that cabin to hear what happens when someone chooses to discriminate against my family." Malik touched a button on his phone. And suddenly, Dr. Amina Adebayo's voice filled the entire first-class cabin with crystal clarity. Every passenger could hear every word as one of the world's most powerful CEOs prepared to demonstrate exactly what real consequences looked like. "Captain Smith, drive!"